Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the Strength Coach Roundtable on the RowingChat podcast network. I'm Will Ruth, rowing strength coach and author of the RowingStronger.com website, and I'm joined by fellow rowing strength coaches Blake Gourley of RowingStrength.com and Joe DeLeo of LeoTraining.io and the Leo Training podcast. Today we're discussing ankle mobility for rowers. Blake has been doing a lot of work on this subject for the last year and has recently written a book just for rowers about the importance of ankle mobility in rowing, assessments to evaluate ankle mobility, and how to improve it from a mobility, flexibility, and strength standpoint, all specific to the rower and rowing coach. He's going to tell us about his work and some of the things that we hope you'll be able to put into your training right away for better performance and reduced risk of injury. First, a note from our sponsors. As a man, do you find it hard to get a dress shirt that actually fits your rowing body? RowingChat introduces William Mahoney, the specialist shirt maker for athletes. Get started with an exclusive 10% discount coupon, RowingChat10. You can follow the link from the show notes or at rowing.chat/sponsors for more information. Also, the Rowing Chat Network is currently surveying our listeners to learn more about you. Please take a few minutes and visit our website and click on the listener survey link found at the bottom of the page. Thank you.
Right, on to today. What we're going to do first is just do a little bit of catch up. It's been a couple months since our last episode. So, Blake, let's start with you because you've been busy. Congratulations on getting the book written. If you just want to tell us about sort of the last few months of that for you, we'd love to hear just what you've been up to.
Yeah, thanks. So the book was kind of a process that took about 10 months. And then with the whole coronavirus happening, I had a little bit more time open up and really just kind of stepped into it and didn't rush it, but was able to finish it a lot faster than I would have without it.
A sprint to the finish.
A sprint to the finish.
Yeah, and so this came from research that you've been doing and your own coaching observations for the last couple of years, right? Since you've really been talking about it.
Yeah, so I was thinking about it, and I think it was kind of an idea that like was planted in my head back in like 2004, to be honest. And I just realized that last night actually.
So for when you realized that the ankle has an important impact on rowing ability.
Not the ankle, but the big picture of movement.
Got it.
So you guys know that I got injured in college, and that's kind of what started me on this track. And what I was realizing was a conversation that I had with my coach after I'd been injured. And what he said to me, and it was all encouragement. There was nothing negative about it, and I still highly respect him, but I had a couple thoughts off of it. And what he said was like, I know several people who've had that injury and they've come back and they've been national champions. And it was encouraging, and I did think about the possibility of going through rehab and continuing and making it work. But the two thoughts I had were like, one, is it worth doing it to my body? Like, is it worth continuing to thrash my body because I had fractured my vertebrae? And two, like, is this normal? Is this standard operating procedure? And is it just now expected as normal? Right? So I think that thought was kind of planted in my mind, and that's kind of what's driven me to do all the coaching I've done and all the research and the education. And then fast forward, after I've looked at movement and collected data from athletes, I started to kind of put things together for my athletes and clients because I wanted to be able to give them a resource. And the big picture is like the whole movement spectrum, not just the ankle. And then my mind has to be organized. So I started with the ankle and then I'm just working my way up the body. So the ankle is super important. I think the hip's a little bit more important in my opinion. But the body's one system, so you can't just like separate it. But what ended up happening was I got into the foot and ankle, and I kept learning more and more and more. And it grew into this 108-page book, which is kind of ridiculous. And what I didn't want to do was since it took me 10 months to do the ankle, I didn't want to sit on this and wait to get the whole movement book out. I wanted to share this information before I got to the hip, because that's going to take me another 10 months. So
maybe with another 8 weeks to stay in place.
Yeah, we got time on our side.
We'll see. And then this obviously came to a head. The three of us have all been on the U.S. Rowing Daily webinar series. Yours was a couple weeks ago, sort of introducing this and talking to a wider audience about that. So we're excited to bring some elements of that into today's discussion, but then also go a little bit further with some more strength training and rowing specific applications. So, Joe, what have you been up to for the last few months?
So in between our last roundtable and this one, the performance center at the hospital I work for got shut down, so I got displaced to work at the hospital to pick up hours. And then as of today, May 1st, earlier this week, I got placed on furlough. So like pretty much everybody else in the country, pretty much at stay at home. So just kind of shifting to putting out some more content, whether that's written, video, or podcast. Did the webinar last week on Master Strength and Conditioning Strength and Conditioning for the Masters Rower, which was with U.S. Rowing. So that's pretty much been it.
And you've had what, four or five podcasts come out for the last month or two?
I published 3 yesterday. And then the month before, at the end of February, I did a whole lightweight series, which is pretty cool. So some very good interviews in there if folks are interested in checking out. I try to get some athletes that were competing in the last 10 to 15 years, and then I kind of went back into the late 80s, early 90s, and interviewed a very well-known lightweight and heavyweight athlete, Peter Anthony out of Australia, who won the lightweight men's single and then went on to win the heavyweight men's double at the 92 Barcelona Olympics. So one of the few athletes to have success at the highest level in both weight classes.
Yeah, cool. So there's plenty of content out there. The three of us are having no trouble staying busy, despite varying levels of actual employment. So between Joe's podcasts, our 3 webinars, Blake's new book, I've had some new blogs, new other stuff coming out too. So we've been putting content out to try to keep people busy and engaged in rowing in the meanwhile. So let's get into the content of today's episode. We will be mostly turning this over to Blake to tell us about the ankle, how the book sort of going more into that origin story on how he came up with the information, the research process of actually writing it. And we've got some audience questions to get to, and then some general roundtable discussion more towards the end. We're going to talk about strength training application, actual implementation of the mobility practices, as well as available technology from apps and different foot plates and sort of more specific stuff. So, Blake, why don't you give us just sort of the big overview of why ankle mobility is important for rowers?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I got into 108 pages of this was that I wanted to understand, because I think everyone understands that ankle mobility is important, but people don't understand why. So a lot of the book is spent explaining why, to give you the value of it, and it's extremely valuable. But it comes down to anatomy, and there's 3 aspects to that. And then it comes down to how limitations might affect the stroke in a positive or negative way. Did you want to get into that now?
Yeah, sure.
Or am I rushing it?
No, wherever it makes sense to start, as far as like if somebody is presently pretty unaware of why their ankle is important for them as a rower, then where would you start with the case for why this matters?
Yeah. So I'd start with the motions of the ankle. So we have dorsiflexion when it pulls up, we have plantar flexion when it points down, and then we have inversion and eversion as it rotates back and forth. What people don't realize is that when there's limitations with any of those motions, it affects the way the joint moves. and that affects the way we load. So the simple way that I explain it is if you have limitations, you're not able to stretch your rubber band taut so that you can launch it across the room. Instead, there's kind of some slack in the rubber band. So you're not able to produce as much force as efficiently if you don't have the motions. So that's one aspect. Two is the structure of the ankle, the way it's designed. So if this is my ankle, if I can't lock out into end range, there's a little bit of wiggle here, and then again there's not as much of a taut rubber band here because I'm not able to load and stretch it as much. And the really cool thing about the ankle is that it's considered a mortise and tenon joint, which is the strongest joint in woodworking. So when the ankle can actually move appropriately, it's super, super strong and stable in this position. So strong that we can produce a big, strong table in woodworking to make the equivalent, right? But when you don't have it, it's got a little give. And when there's give, I talk about calling that athlete Aaron Rodgers. So it results in a discount double check.
Which you may need to explain some for our international viewers. I will also note too that we're on video right now. Blake is sort of miming a couple things as we go. If you're watching this on YouTube, it will make sense. If you're watching it while you're erging or driving or doing anything else where you're audio only, do please check out our show notes that we'll post on this at rowing.chat afterwards, and we'll have little links to all these videos and pictures and other helpful stuff, and we'll tell you who Aaron Rodgers is too, just in case you need that. But Blake, go ahead and tell us about the double check.
Sorry, I'm so used to Zoom calls now. I always think I'm on video.
Yeah, we evolved.
Yeah, so if you don't have adequate ankle range motion, you come into the catch, you reach your end range earlier than everyone else in the boat or earlier than you should. It forces you to roll up onto your toes, and then you reach a limit again because you only have so much flexibility in the foot and big toe. And then that forces you to bounce off the foot plate probably before you put the blade in the water. So you check the boat when you reach your first end range of motion at the ankle. And then you check the boat again as you roll up and reach your end range on the top of your toes. And those both happen before the blade's in the water. So you actually check the boat twice before you're even locked on and driving. So rowers, that usually makes a lot of sense because you don't want any check in the boat, and you're getting two just because you have a bad ankle.
And it comes at an especially sensitive point too, where you're coming into the front end of the stroke, and you don't want a lot of excess motion there or restricted motion there either.
Right, and yeah. It's gonna change the amount of comfort you have into the catch. It's gonna change compression.
So if I'm a rowing coach looking at a boat of athletes, what are sort of some things that I'm seeing to indicate an ankle restriction? Or should we be just sort of assessing everybody on land right from the start before they even get in the boat?
Yeah, so my point of view is the more information I have ahead of time, the better. I realize that's not always practical for some coaches. So best case scenario, you interview or you put someone through a complete movement screen. You know everything about them, and then there's no surprises. If you don't do that, you might see some common technical manifestations, which there's more than this, but like kind of the knees collapsing together, the arches collapsing as you come into the catch, lack of compression, so the shins aren't reaching vertical, or a big overreach from the upper body. So big reach from the back and the shoulders, which is probably putting you up at a higher chance of injury for rib stress fractures, I would think, and also the low back.
And so those are just sort of the common movement compensations that we would see in technique that we might be able to treat as technical, but that might actually be related to ankle mobility. Is that right?
Yeah. So I think that's a big point to make, is that I've been this coach before, and a lot of coaches have done this or are doing this, where it's like get more compression, get more compression, get more compression. And you just say it over and over again, and you try to say it in different ways, and you try all these different coaching cues, and you do it on land and on the water, and they just can't get it. It's probably not the athlete's fault. They do want to make a change, but they literally don't know how because of the limitation of the ankle.
Gotcha. So if we can assess people on land, then what are some common movements or common ways we might be able to see that somebody has a restricted ankle before they get on the water?
Yeah, so in the book I have 4 assessments. I have a pass-fail, I have an ankle number, I have a big toe, and then I have a foot typing screen. And I would do them in that order based on how much information you have. Again, I'm an information guy, so I want all of it. It gives me more information, but some people want to do the minimum. So you could easily do the pass-fail screen. That's where I would start people. And that's at least going to tell you if there's a limitation. And if there's a limitation, you can start working on it. And that might interest you to do the ankle number screen, which is my favorite screen because it actually gives you a number to help you rig around.
You want to tell us about how that goes down?
Yeah. So the pass fail, I would kneel on one knee with my other foot up at 90 degrees, and I would go fist with thumb up, touching the wall. Thumb is touching the wall, and the pinky side of my fist is touching my toe. So I'm only a fist length away from the wall with my up leg. And then what I do is I rock forward without collapsing inward. And if I can touch my knee to the wall, that comes out to 40 to 45 degrees of ankle range of motion, which is what I recommend for rowers. So if you touch the wall without compensation, you pass. That's awesome. You probably don't need to spend time on your ankle. If you don't touch, you fail, and you should probably focus in on the ankle.
Or if people do some of those compensations, like what are some ways that people could cheat that test to make it look like they have more ankle mobility than they do?
Yeah, so the heel needs to stay flat. The knee can't drop inward, and the arch can't collapse. And then you also want to keep your hips in a line, in a straight line, so you don't want to like swing your hip out to the right or the left.
So you're just trying to drive the knee straight forward to the wall while keeping even pressure front and back of the foot, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I have videos of this if people want to see it later as well.
Yeah, and obviously in the book too, you've got this whole approach spelled out. So we're trying to go through sort of the highlights of it to give people what they can put into practice, but also acknowledging that audio only is not necessarily the ideal way to do this. So we'll have more in the show notes. I know. I mean, the book came out of like you had about 10 blogs that felt like coming into the book of all of the ankle mobility stuff. So you've got a lot of the stuff on your website already. And then, so I guess, and Joe, feel free to jump in, by the way, if you have a question as we're going. But so from that assessment, that gives you the number of the mobility range that the athlete has, right?
Yeah, so that I just described the pass-fail one. So that's just touching the wall. If you touch, you pass. If you don't, you fail. But the ankle number screen is basically the same test without the wall. But you actually use an app on your phone. For Apple users, it's called the Measure app. For Android, I am forgetting what it's called right now, but I have that, so I can get that to you. So you download it on your phone. If you have an Apple, it's already on your phone. You open the app, you select level. You level it out on the floor, and then you put that same surface of the phone on your shin. And then you do the same test, and that'll give you a specific number. So when I did the video for the ankle number, it showed my number is 43. The cool part about that is now you have an exact number, so you can show yourself progress as you work on it. So I already said 40 to 45 is my recommended range, so I'm good, right? But it could be better. And when I relate it to the foot plate, I can help narrow in on my ideal foot plate angle, which will not only reduce my chance of injury, but also increase my performance.
And so where did the 40 to 45 number come from? Like that recommendation?
Yeah, so physical therapists are not, I mean, people have different numbers, but the SFMA, which is what I respect the most, which Great Cook and many others, they recommend a healthy ankle have 40 to 50 degrees of ankle range of motion. And I was like, okay, well, rowers probably need something in there, but let's see what the angles are in the sport of rowing, and then let's decide what's a prerequisite, what do rowers need to do this safely and effectively. So I looked at the angle on the foot plate of the boat and the angle of the foot plate on the rowing machine. So rowing machine's about 42 degrees. The boat, you can adjust it anywhere between 37 and 47 degrees. And then most coaches typically do a standard of 40 to 42 degrees for the foot plate angle on the boat. So what I did was I was like, okay, well, if the ideal position in the rowing stroke is vertical shin, then if I'm on the ground on a flat surface, sorry, I'm miming again.
Well, it's like describing a game of Twister, to some extent. So we'll get as close as we can with verbal only, and then refer more folks to the show notes for the exact stuff.
Yeah. So basically, I translated what it would be like flat on the floor to having the foot angled up on the foot plate.
Yeah,
and then also incorporating the fact that we do want a little bit of heel lift. Like we don't want to be rowing with our heels flat the whole time. Like it's okay to actually roll over the ball of our foot, and there's actually benefits to that.
Yeah. So you're taking the general recommendations from physical therapy on sort of normal human movement, and then merging it with the specific recommendations from rowing specific needs and background information.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's because that's an interesting issue for rowers is if you run or if you play a field sport or something like that, your foot has essentially unrestricted motion. You can use as much mobility as you have. But in rowing, we've got the limitation of the foot plate. And that's part of what interested me most about your book is the way of combining that general physical therapy, movement, strength training knowledge with the specific rowing approach, which is ultimately where we need to go because we do a weird sport that it's different than other sports. We can't just one-to-one transfer training methods from other programs.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of feedback I've gotten from coaches throughout the year too. Is throughout the years is that I've always known from my point of view that movement's important, and I've seen the benefits, but sometimes coaches don't buy in because they don't understand the why. And they're like, well, this isn't specific to rowing. It's like, well, let's make it specific to rowing.
Right. Let's provide that resource. Yeah. It's super cool. And so for people who tend to just do I stretch my ankles already, I do a static calf stretch or something, the classic toe on the wall kind of thing. I would say, as I just said, your book goes into a ton more flexibility or a ton more depth and breadth on flexibility, mobility, strength training. What are people missing from just doing the toe on the wall, stretching the calf sort of thing that they would get from more of a comprehensive approach?
Yeah, so I think the biggest mistake people make when it comes to changing movement is that they literally just stretch. Or you have two extremes. You have I'm going to say yogi, but yoga is not bad. You have the two extremes. You got a yogi on one side and you got a weightlifter on the other side. I'm not going to say Will's on one side or the other. So one of them stretches a lot and one of them only strength trains. Both of them are wrong and both of them are the problem. You have to find the in-between to actually make a change. So the biggest mistake people make is they just do one or the other. And a lot of times all they're doing is stretching, and they're never actually teaching the body to use the new range, and they're not loading that new range to give the body a reason to hold on to it. So my system basically combines 3 steps. It's step 1 is mobilize, which again, this system is nothing new. I just tried to simplify it and make it my own. I'm sure your guys' system's very similar, and everyone I've ever learned from has a very similar system with some tweaks. Step one's mobilize. So to me, all I'm doing is I'm trying to relax the body so it gives me some new range. I think a lot of times when we create a change in motion, it's not actually something physical happening. I think it's actually more neuromuscular. So step one, mobilize by relaxing the body. Step two, utilize. So use that new range in a safe, controlled manner. And then three, maximize, which is strengthen our load. So 3-step process, they're more complicated when you get into them, but that's how I simplified it. And then I also have an option of taking the bullet train, which I designed.
Needs explanation.
Which I designed for clients because depending on the person, like some people will see changes really quickly and some people will take longer. And what I realized that the majority of my clients need to put in extra work, and an hour a week isn't going to do it. So I basically made like a at-home program that they could do throughout their day or maybe just once a day that would make changes quicker. So it's taking the bullet train, you're taking the fast way across the town.
Gotcha. Joe, anything coming up for you so far?
I did have a question pop up. So in regards to kind of foot position as we come up into the catch, Blake, do you think it would be beneficial if we were able to get into a position where if we were at the catch, we had minimal distance between the heel and the foot plate, so that way as we are getting into the drive, there's less time before the whole foot's in contact with the foot plate?
Yeah, good question. I think heel lift is good. I think excessive is bad, and I think none is also bad. So I tried to find a standard for what was good for heel lift, and there was honestly no standard out there. The best thing I could find was, well, FISA says 2.7 inches and US Rowing says 3 inches. And I may have mixed those numbers up.
For the heel tie, is that what you're referring to there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a safety precaution, right? That's not a performance metric.
That is a safety precaution, but if we're required to do it and there's no standard already, we might as well try to stay within those limits, right?
Yeah.
So the standard I came up with was, let's stay within those limits. Closer to the foot plate is better with the heel. Beyond that, you're just tugging on that heel tie if you're rowing with that, right?
So that's the maximum, but what's the minimum? Because I've coached with some coaches who coach heels down, as soon as possible, sort of the whole way. There's obviously some of this is going to be stroke philosophy, so we're not trying to get into necessarily which one's better than the other because it depends on the rest of the program context. But from a strength training approach or from a movement assessment approach, is there a sort of optimal middle point there, or is that just entirely up to the stroke philosophy and how the person actually moves?
So I would never want to change what a coach wants to do with their technique, for sure.
All of us want happy rowing coaches.
But if I were to relate it to how our body loads, I at least want to be able to roll over my big toe a little bit. So like, honestly, the more I can roll over my big toe, the more stretch I'm getting in that rubber band I talked about. Mm-hmm. So we're loading our whole backside better. So what I kind of skipped over was there's a fascial line. So that's basically saran wrap that wraps our body. There's a fascial line that connects at our big toe, wraps under our foot, back around our heel, our calf, up the low back, up the upper back, up our neck, and then it actually wraps around and connects to our forehead. So everything from our big toe to our forehead is connected. So if you imagine that's a rubber band stretched, any little motion that I get rolling over my big toe is going to put a little bit more stretch in that rubber band, and you know how adding stretch to the rubber band shoots it further or hurts when you hit someone with it, right? So I think rolling over that big toe is beneficial. So keeping the heel down, you're not getting any of that roll or any of that stretch. And there's technical arguments too, but we'll leave that to the technical coaches.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, the role of the strength coach is to make sure that the rowers have the physical ability to do what the rowing coach wants them to do in technique. So our role is just to make sure that athletes can achieve whatever the rowing coach wants to achieve as far as the exact stroke philosophy goes. But I think it's interesting. I mean, certainly for self-coached rowers or for open-minded rowing coaches who may be listening to this, rethinking, do we want firm heels down at the catch versus a bit of heel lift to get onto the ball of the foot, onto the big toe? As long as athletes are then getting back down onto the heel through the rest of the drive, then it sounds like what you're saying is there's performance to be gained from coming up off the heel some to get into that extra elasticity.
Yeah, and I think the big argument for getting the heel down early is that it engages our backside sooner, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the big argument, and that's where the strength comes from, or a lot of the strength comes from. So it is beneficial. So the sooner you can get the heels down to engage the backside more, that's better. But there's also benefits to pressing off the front end with our quads, and it's okay to be lifted for a little bit.
Cool. So, I mean, we're sort of getting into this topic too, but the ability to integrate what we're doing in the gym or on the land and the rowing specific technical practice, and then also considering some of the rigging adjustments that we can make for the athlete is, I think, the value of your book that contributes the most to the rowing world is like, how do we put all of those issues together? We've got the physical abilities, we've got the rowing technique, the stroke philosophy, and we've got the issue of rigging. We know from rigging that you can't make any change in isolation, that if you change the angle of the foot plate, then something else about the athlete's technique has changed too. So talk us through sort of that issue of how the three come together with foot plate, technique, and ankle mobility.
Yeah.
As
what was that?
Your dog makes the background.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that most foot plates can be adjusted between 37 and 47 degrees. And we know that having a lower angle is going to produce more vertical force. And most rowers know that we want the stroke to be as horizontal as possible. So as you...
That's basically the difference in height between the foot stretcher and the seat is what's creating that vertical force. So if we get the foot stretcher and the seat further in line, then or closer in line, then that's where we're getting more horizontal force.
Oh, sorry, I was talking about angle.
Okay.
Did I say height? Sorry.
That's okay.
Thanks.
A lot of variables going on.
Thanks for clarifying.
No.
Yeah, so the lower the angle of the foot plate, the more vertical the force, the higher the angle of the foot plate, the more horizontal the force. So that doesn't mean that we should just put everyone up at 47 degrees. It's about rigging the boat to that athlete. And like you said, it will affect other things. So you either have to really be in touch with your body if you're a singles rower, or you have to have a coach help you as well, because it's about using this number to find your ideal foot plate angle, but you don't want to let it affect your technique in a negative way. You don't want it to lead to pain. You don't want it to. Those are the two.
47, sort of what happens? Like if you're you and you've got 43 degrees of motion and you throw it up to 47, like what are some bad things that are going to happen?
Yeah. So basically, the three compensations we mentioned plus more will probably happen or become worse. So collapsing with the knees and the arches, overreaching with the back and the shoulders, and getting even less compression if you go too high and it's not right for you. And then obviously all of those technical compensations create wear and tear, and eventually it might break our body down. So yeah, what I really like about the ankle number screen is that it gives you a number that you can play within. So I was at 43. So if I had 43 degrees on the ankle number screen, I would play within ±2 of my foot plate angle. So I'd play with 41 to 45. And that's just kind of giving yourself some play because the measurement's not perfect and we rise up onto our toe and everything. But that gives you some degrees to play within, and then you go out in your single or you go out with your coach, and you just say, okay, well, this actually feels better. I'm going a little bit faster, and my technique looks better. That's awesome. Let's stick with this. And I've already got some positive feedback from several people around the world who've been like, I use this and I immediately saw this, or I did this and like it actually creates a change, and like it's pretty cool. Because before, I think it was, at least for me, it was unknown, and I was also kind of scared of it because I didn't want to screw up other parts of the stroke. And you do have to take into account how it affects that, right? Because I would never say go at 47 if you're rowing like crap, right? So find the highest angle you can row with that allows you to row with good technique. That's the goal.
We have that option with the rigging to customize the setup of the boat, but you're right, it is intimidating, and the way that if you change one thing, then something else changes too. But I think that this is providing a different view of it, where it's not necessarily just technique oriented, but where we're taking physical data from the athlete to give us a clue as to what sort of technique and rigging is going to work best for them. And so we talked about the angle there. Do you want to talk about the height too?
Yeah. So that's a question I've been getting is, like, you've talked about the angle, but what about the height? I'm not a huge fan of adjusting the height to adjust for the ankle. And the only reason I don't like that is because of what you said, how it affects the other parts of the stroke. So I've done this with athletes before where they weren't getting enough body angle forward, so I dropped their feet, and all of a sudden they're just like, they're floppy and gumby, and they're falling into the catch, they're collapsing into the catch, and I just created a bigger problem than what I had before. And the answer is somewhere in between for sure, but if I lower the feet too much, it's going to require less hip range of motion, might result in collapsing over, and it actually requires more ankle range of motion when I lower my feet. And then the opposite, if I raise my feet, I now need more hip mobility. Otherwise, I'm going to kind of tuck my butt underneath me and start to really wear away at my low back. I'm going to have problems getting into a good catch position, but I'll need less ankle mobility. So if I did want to adjust the height for a limited ankle, I would raise the feet a little bit, but you got to be cautious that you're going to change the hip as well. I only lower the feet for people that have hip problems.
One of the ways that people are lowering the feet now is actually just by raising the seat, right? If you use a seat pad, then you're changing that ratio of seat to foot stretcher height. So I wonder, for the people who are maybe using a seat pad for either back comfort or to enable them to get over more with more body angle, what is that changing at the ankle that they might consider?
Yeah, so adding a seat pad basically just lowers the feet, which actually requires more ankle range of motion. But it requires less hip range of motion. So if it feels better on their back, it's because they're not having to use their hips as much. But that's a good thing.
Yeah. But it does, one of the differences of adding the seat pad versus lowering the feet is that you're increasing your center of mass above the water, right? Just by a small amount. But if you have the ability to drop the feet down, then that might be a better option than adding the seat pad for that reason alone, right? Is my logic on that sound?
Yeah, and sometimes you have seat pads slipping off during a race, and that's not always something you want.
So there are some of these systems out there. We've gotten a couple audience questions about adjustable foot plate systems. Either one of the things that we haven't talked about is changing the width So the width in between the feet, as well as systems that can change angle and height. So you want to talk about some of the available technology in foot plate and anything that either has come up in your research or that you've particularly liked to use.
Yeah, so a lot of people brought up Shimano and their adjustable or pivoting foot stretcher. I had heard from people that it was a good option, that it was similar to kind of what BatLogic has. And I've looked at it multiple times, and to be honest, I'm a little confused by it. Doesn't mean it's not a good product. It's just I don't fully understand it. But it seems like basically you just have control of adjusting multiple variables with your feet, and I'm on board with anything that can allow you to fit the boat better to your body. So if that's what it does, I love it. But I don't have personal experience and I don't have full understanding of their system, so I can't say for sure. I do like a lot of things about BatLogic. It gets a little different, but I would still adjust the foot plate angle even if I had BatLogic. You now have the option for heel lifts and kind of leg length discrepancy issues, and kind of just being able to take it with you to and from the boat, and potentially the erg if you have the attachments are great. And then in terms of shoes, I love Project Bees. Mostly because they allow the toe to spread naturally. They allow the appropriate motion to happen at the forefoot. I think I'm forgetting something positive about it as well, but
basically the more customization we could do for the athlete, probably the better, as long as it's coming from an informed perspective of taking into account mobility, strength, flexibility, technique, etc. Is that inaccurate?
Yeah, and I think the biggest problem is just finding the time to do it. So I think some of the questions I've gotten is like, well, how? How am I supposed to do this with 30 plus athletes when there's one coach? And that makes me a big fan of giving athletes responsibility. And I mean, you could simply do something like watch my videos, read the book, whatever, learn how to do it, teach the athletes, or just give them the YouTube link and be like, hey, you're at home right now. I want you to get your ankle number, and then watch this video of how to adjust your foot plate angle and put your boat in slings. Before we go out on the water, I want you to pick the highest angle +2 of your ankle number. We're going to go out on the water. We're going to see how it looks. And then you do that for a week, and then eventually you're going to find your ideal angle.
And especially for folks who are maybe stuck on the erg now, it is a good time to sort of have time to experiment with that in a controlled setting. What I'm getting from you is make one change, not 4 changes, right? Don't adjust the width and also the angle and also the height, but just make one change and then trial it for a bit and see how it goes from a power perspective, and endurance perspective, and a technical perspective.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. Yeah, I think the basic recommendation is find your angle and then play around with height. And that's not just from me, that's other people as well.
One of the things that shows up in the book that don't have any experience in myself and I'm interested to hear more about is the influence of the foot. We've been talking a lot about the ankle, but the foot is part of that system too, and textured insoles. What do you think about those?
Yeah, so it's debatable, and I'm not 100% sold, but I do think there's something there. So I've gone to I go to these conferences every year, and there's like 30 plus speakers, and one of them that I've seen speak before is a podiatrist, and she created these insoles. And there's other things on the market as well, but she created these insoles that basically have a bunch of little nubs on them to stimulate your feet. And the idea is that we have these nerves in our feet, and when we stimulate them, it gives our body feedback, and it tells our body how to move. So when we get adequate feedback, it actually helps improve movement. And it also changes the timing that muscles fire. It changes the intensity. It changes the order, et cetera, et cetera. So just stimulating the foot can change a lot of positive things for us. So there is a study out there where it's not really conclusive, because a lot of the positives weren't actually confirmed, or weren't statistically significant, but there were changes in the group that had the more dense insoles, is what they call them. But the insoles also they were kind of like makeshift. Like you can't even buy them anywhere. It's like they had regular insoles in the study, and then they had a low density, which was like, I don't know, four dots on the insole. And then they had a high density, which was like thick, big, multiple dots on the insole. So the stimulation was a little different, but it's not like a scientific form of stimulation. So like hers stimulates your feet in a different way. I've experienced it, and I've had clients use it. And they do like it, but it's kind of unconfirmed right now. It's kind of like, hey, this may help. Go ahead and try this out, but we're not 100% sure.
Sure. Sticking with the foot, how about interaction of foot build and ankle mobility? So if you've got high arches or flat feet, how does that affect your ankle mobility and maybe your strategy for rigging or stretching, mobilizing, etc.?
Yeah. So I have a screen in there for foot typing. And what that does is it gets the athlete out of their shoes. And if you're by yourself, you just take a picture from the back of your feet, just straight on, feet shoulder width apart, feet straight ahead. And you just look at what your feet do naturally. If you have a coach, you have the coach take the picture, the coach look from behind. And what the foot typing does is it tells you, do I have a neutral foot? Do I have an immobile foot? Or do I have an unstable foot? So if I have a neutral foot, awesome. I'm ready to go. I'm probably going to load and explode pretty well. If I have an immobile foot, that usually presents itself as high arches. If I have an immobile foot, then my primary goal should probably be to work on mobility.
For the foot or for the ankle, or both?
So I've found that if you have an ankle limitation, you also have a foot problem. But I've found that you can have a foot problem and not an ankle problem. That's just what I've seen. Doesn't mean it always works that way. But so if I find an ankle problem, I'm working on the foot and the ankle. But sometimes I'll just work on the foot.
Got it.
But yeah, if I'm doing foot typing, that's probably confirming that if I have big high arches, I probably have an immobile foot. So you'd want to work on mobility of the foot if you have high arches. And then you'd want to work on strength if you have collapsing arches or low arches. Having said that, sometimes you lack mobility or have big arches because your body's responding to a lack of stability. So strengthening your feet would still be beneficial and a safe thing to do.
Yeah, and of course we're not looking for prescriptive answers here. Everybody's different. People should get evaluated individually by physical therapists or other medical professionals, but just sort of talking like as a rule or as a general advice, I guess, for strength coaches and rowing coaches, for general things to look out for. How about like a goal target for mobility improvement? So if I do have bad ankle mobility, let's say I'm at 37 degrees and I want to increase, am I looking for like a specific amount per?
Like per session,
per week, per whatever, like what am I looking for?
Yeah. I would say any change is good. So I have like my favorite clients are the ones that immediately change.
Of course.
Don't tell them that. And then the most challenging clients are the ones that take time. Right. So let's say I do my ankle number screen, so anyone can do this at home. So I do my ankle number screen, I get 43, for example, and then I try an intervention, and then I measure again. and now I'm at 44 degrees, for example. It's like, okay, well, it created a positive change. So now I have confirmation. Now I know this is good for me, and I'm going to work on this until I reach my goal, whatever my goal might be. And then you have clients that, like, you gotta play around, you gotta put in more time, you gotta take the bullet train to actually start to see changes. So I mean, if you're using the ankle number, you're looking for a minimum of a degree change to confirm that you've made a change, just because that's to what degree it can pick up changes.
Mm-hmm. And one of the questions from an implementation standpoint is this best to work on like multiple times a day in shorter doses, or is it better to do like a longer dose once a day or once every couple days, or pre-practice, post-practice? I mean, like if you have like those successful clients who change quickly, and you can tie it to a methodology, what would you have them do?
Yeah. So from a team perspective, I'm thinking water days when you're not doing any strength work. You do step 1 and step 2. So you mobilize and you utilize. So you skip the strengthen step. And then the days when you're doing strength training, you do all 3 steps. You incorporate all of those into your program. And then in terms of like people at home right now, or etc., a lot of my clients come to me once a week. So again, that's not enough to create change. So what I do is I give them the bullet train. They do it once a day or more if they can. And then they start to see changes either more quickly or to a greater effect. So I would say do it as part of your warm-up before every workout, and then incorporate something that works on the foot or the ankle strength and mobility once a day, and that's going to start to create a ton of change. And it's not spending like 20 minutes to an hour every day. It's much quicker than that.
So higher frequency, shorter doses, more movement generally, instead of one long dose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we're coming up right on the end of our hour. So is there anything, I mean, obviously you've put out a lot of this information on your blog, in the book, through the webinar. Is there anything that you haven't gotten to talk about, or like new? I know you've mentioned off air that you're already thinking of new things to incorporate and write about. What are some future directions or things you haven't gotten to talk about yet that people ought to think about?
I mean, I wish I had touched on width. I wish I had touched on foot splay, touched on height a little bit more, gotten a little bit more detailed in it. I wish I went into more detail in implementing. So all things that we basically discussed already.
If width is adjustable for the athlete, do you have any general guidelines on that?
I think we've talked about this before, where it's like not everyone should squat the same way. Mm-hmm. It's also probably not beneficial that we're putting all rowers in the same position, right? Because not everyone's hips are designed the same way. So it would be nice to actually find the proper width for the rower, and that might be something that's coming with the hip project. But yeah, finding the proper splay, the angle, the height of the foot, and also the width would probably go a long way for helping our athletes perform better, but also just lower the wear and tear.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Anything else, Joe, you want to add before we kick off here?
No, I think that was great. Enjoying it. Blake, great job on the book.
Thank you.
Where could people find the book if they are moved to purchase it?
So I have it available for physical print copy on Amazon. It's called The Movement of Rowing. And I have the ebook available for instant download on my website, which is rowingstrength.com.
So rowingstrength.com, they can find all the information from there. We will have show notes here linking to Blake's book and many other things that we talked about. We've also got links in there to Joe's podcast. And so you can catch up on those episodes, my blog, RowingStronger.com, or you can catch up on that stuff. We got Joe's webinar, my 2 webinars. One was on minimalist strength training, and the other was on build the back, spare the spine. Joe's on strength training importance for masters rowers, with a really cool progression of masters specific research that people can draw on for coming up with the importance of strength training. So we've got a lot out there to hopefully tide you over. And thanks, Blake, for coming on to share your ankle experience.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, guys.
All right, so thanks to Blake for sharing your material with us today. Thanks to the Rowing Chat sponsor of this month, William Mahoney and his shirts. And thanks to you, the listener, for joining us. Check out rowing.chat for the show notes from this episode, including links to all the video and demonstration content we referred to, and to find more work from Blake, Joe, and me. If you can, please take a few minutes while you're there to fill out the Rowing Chat listener survey. Until our next episode, be well and happy training.